All right. So in the first section, we spoke more about the art market in a macro sense, looking at the different role players, the different ecosystems that you can interact with as a collector, how you can get access to artists and artworks and start your collection journey. The next section is looking more micro at looking specifically at maybe different types of artworks, different mediums, how to look after those works, and also just general what kind of art you might come into contact with when you are collecting and when you're visiting galleries and museums, and understanding how those mediums work and what's involved in those mediums. So to start off with, I'm going to touch briefly on individual mediums that you have in artwork. So this is a little bit confusing because you can get a medium such as paintings and sculpture and photography, but you can also get mediums within mediums such as painting. You can get oil painting, acrylic painting, watercolor. Sculpture, you can get bronze, marble, wood. Photography, you can get silver gelatin prints, and you can get digital prints. So sort of it's interesting to think about those, but also consider them as you are collecting. And it's also important, I think, to understand the different types of mediums, but also materials within your mediums, because it helps you understand value. Certain works are priced higher than others. It's important to understand how you insure artworks, which I'll touch on later, how to store them and frame them, and also install them. All different mediums have different necessities and needs in terms of looking after them. Unfortunately, there's not enough time to go into depth on each individual one, but I think it's important just to touch on certain artworks and mediums as they can be topics for future research and discussion. So let's look specifically at painting. In painting, you can, the sort of typical materials within painting, you can get oil painting, acrylic, watercolors, gouache, spray paint, and enamel. Usually you'll find paintings either on canvas, wood, or paper, and those are sort of, depending on how they're painted or on what medium they're painted, there's a different way to look after them. Canvas potentially is sort of the most stable, whereas paper is less so. There's a longer period, paper works might not last as long as canvas works. When you're looking at value, oil painting is usually valued higher than acrylics because oil painting is usually much slower drying, whereas acrylic is fast drying, and that has an impact on the value. Then we look at works on paper. These can include drawing, chalk works, charcoal works, graphites, ink, and pastels. Works on papers are usually standalone, unique works. And again, this has an impact on how you would insure them and the longevity of each work. Works on paper are usually very fragile, so it's important to consider that when displaying them, installing them, and storing them. Again, I'll speak about specifics later. Then you get prints. These are usually edition works, so you can have an edition of 1, you can have an edition up to 500, depending on the printing process and the specific style the artist is going for. Different sort of medium materials to look for in this are aquatints, dry points, engravings, etchings, lithography, monoprints, screen prints, and woodcuts. As I said, it's important to think about the edition, the size of the edition. How does this affect the pricing? A larger edition will usually mean that the price is lower. So if you have a print that is an edition size of 1 of 5, that'll be more expensive than a print that is 1 of 200. And that applies also to photography, which we'll get to next. Prints, it's also important to get certificates of authenticity. Certificates of authenticity are important to have to prove your ownership. Then looking at photography, there's sort of 3 main areas that photography, you can get C prints, silver gelatin prints, and Polaroids. Within each of C print, gelatin prints, and Polaroids, there are different subsections, but for example, C prints are usually digital prints, gelatin silver prints are through a specific process, and then Polaroids, as most people know, what sort of Polaroid through a Polaroid camera. Again, C prints or digital prints there's a certain way that you can insure them and store them purely because the digital file exists, you can reprint them. Silver gelatin printing process is a lot more involved and takes much longer. Therefore, you need to be much more careful with these works and look after them in a certain way and insure them in a certain way. Next, there's mixed media. So this can include collage, bricolage, assembly, installation art, and tapestries. Installation art is a very interesting one. It's usually large-scale installations by artists that can take up rooms. Usually those are collected by museums and foundations that have the way to display them because they're not usually made for domestic spaces. Then within sculpture, you have different techniques, but then also different materials. So the different techniques you can get: carving, casting, modeling, constructing, and assembling. And then the different materials, you get bronze, marble, wood, clay, metal, plaster, and paper mache. Again, all techniques and materials have different characteristics which affect value and the way to look after them. And then lastly, you get multimedia, which includes video, sound, and animation. These are all very interesting, and there's some incredibly exciting work being created in these mediums. Again, different technologies are affecting the way that works are priced, but also the way they're looked after. For example, certain types of video works, if it's works on VHS, then you need to think of technology obsolete. If technology becomes obsolete, and how to look after that. Specifically with sound, how do you care for the speakers and the audio tracks? Same with animation. An interesting example, and this is more closely to installation art, but I worked with a collector who had a large installation of fluorescent bulbs on an artwork. Fluorescent bulbs are starting to become obsolete, so we've had to buy a stock of fluorescent bulbs to ensure that when some of them die, the artwork can exist and continue. So within multimedia and installation, it's also important to think of the technology that underlies the artwork and how to look after that. Then once you've decided what artwork you want to buy and you've collected it, the next thing is to think about how to look after that artwork, how to hang that on your wall, how to bring that home and ensure its value, sort of preserve its value, be it cultural, aesthetic, or financial value over the future. So the most important thing, one of the most important things I think to do as a collector when you start, and it doesn't matter the size of your collection, is start to catalog it. This is important, and it can include information like artwork title, the size, the medium, the edition, the location where the work is, where you purchased the work from, who owned the work previously, what valuations, if there have been recent valuations for the work, examples of the literature written about the work. And within this, you can store your invoices and certificates of authenticity, which I'll speak about now. Most collectors initially start on an Excel spreadsheet, and it's a great way to start building your database or your catalog. But there are lots of different tools. Some of them are digital as well, which are really important and very helpful, and a great way to manage your collection, to understand everything that exists around it, all the information, which again is incredibly valuable and adds value to the collection as it grows. Within this, there's the paperwork, as I mentioned, invoices and certificates of authenticity. Invoices are important to show ownership of works, but it also has a good record of the value of the work and how that can change over time. Certificates of authenticity are very important, especially when you have edition works like edition photography, edition prints, and edition videos. They show proof of ownership and the proof of the work's authenticity. Certificates of authenticity invoices are incredibly important when claiming through insurance, showing ownership, proving value, or trying to sell an artwork on. If you try to sell a photograph without its certificate of authenticity, lots of collectors will refuse to buy it just because they don't think that the work is authentic or belongs to you. So when you buy artworks, ensure that you get all the necessary paperwork from the gallery and then store it in a secure place. Next thing to think about when bringing your artworks home is insurance. I think the most important step when you're starting insurance is to catalog your collection, which we've just mentioned. So starting out by cataloging, because you're able then to give all that information to the insurers along with the paperwork, which is very helpful when insuring a collection. The next step is to determine what is going to be insured and for how much. Again, this can vary depending on the value of the work and the different mediums that you own. Secondly, next, it's also important, I think, for collectors make a mistake by thinking that their run-of-the-mill household insurance covers their artwork collection. So it's very important to check with your insurance broker that your artworks are covered, but also that they're covered at the right value. Next, art gets damaged most frequently during transport, even just across the house or in long distances. So it's very important to ensure that you have adequate insurance for transportation. Lastly, and this sort of ties into the specific mediums that we spoke about earlier, it's very important to consider the type of medium when insuring your collection. For example, when you insure a unique painting, drawing, or non-edition sculpture, you will usually insure that at full value. This is because the work is unique and there's no replacement for that. So if the work gets damaged, there's no other example of it. So you want to insure it for its complete value. However, if you have an edition photograph, or if specifically a digital photograph, or edition print, or edition video, there are other editions of this work. So you would actually usually insure that work for its replacement cost. For example, with a digital photograph, the digital file of that work exists already. So all you need to do is cover the cost of reprinting and reframing that work. This is helpful when insuring a large collection. You're able to keep your premiums down by insuring certain works for the specific mediums. Then when you have work, it's also important to think about how to frame that work. There are many different ways that you can frame works specific to their medium. Painting, sometimes, most paintings aren't framed. Sometimes if you do frame them, you just have an outside frame without the glass. Works on paper, because they're very fragile, it's very important to try and frame them. Tapestries, depending on the size and the medium, it also will dictate how you frame a work. Some collections that I've worked for have very large tapestries, size 4 meters by 2 meters. It's not very sustainable or practical to try and frame it, so you need to protect it as much as possible. But I've also worked for collectors who have small silk tapestries. Silk tapestries are very fragile, so it's very important then to frame the work. Same with photography, the different mediums you can frame differently. Specifically with digital prints, you can die bond and dissect works, which are sort of new framing techniques which don't exist with a frame. They don't have a frame, and otherwise you can obviously go for this very simple sort of glass and frame. When thinking about the glass, there's obviously different types you can get. You can get UV protective, which is very important when you're thinking of works on paper, because sun damage can really impact the paper. You can also get museum glass, or if the work is quite hardy or robust, you can get perspex, which reduces the weight of the frame, but also reduces the cost. Then once you've got works framed and you have them at home, the other option is, the next thing is to think about how to install them. Installation is definitely more of a practical demonstration, and it's also up to the taste of the collector where you want to put your works and how you want to display them. There's no necessary right and wrong way, although there are some pointers which I'll touch on now. When installing a work, usually you will hang the midpoint of the artwork 155 centimeters above the ground. This is usually sort of a good viewing point for most heights of people. Then never hang artworks above a heater or aircon or fireplaces. The change in temperature will really start to impact artworks over a long period of time. Avoid hanging certain artworks, such as works on paper or paintings in bathrooms, because there will usually be a large moisture buildup, which will start to impact the authenticity and the structure of the work. And never install an artwork in direct sunlight, because over time that artwork will start to deteriorate. If you do have to install it in direct sunlight, or there's no other option, then it's important to rotate that work regularly and install different works in that space. Avoid areas of heavy foot traffic or near doorways. Again, people walking past can knock artworks off the wall and damage those works. When thinking about the temperature, this is usually very difficult to control unless you have a specific gallery or museum, but the ideal environmental conditions are usually a temperature of 20 to 22 degrees Celsius and a relative humidity range of 45 to 55%. Then when thinking about storing artworks, it's always important to store works off the ground. This can be because, there could be flooding or something like that, so you always want to make sure that the work is off the ground. If you have photographs or works in frames, it's always important to either store artworks facing face-to-face in terms of the glass to the glass, or back-to-back. This also just is a better way to store and preserve works. You would not store works in bubble wrap. So you can bubble wrap works when they're transported, but when they get to the storage location or location that they are going to be stored in, I would always advise to remove the bubble wrap. Specifically for paintings, the fabric and the painting likes to breathe. So if you have it wrapped in bubble, then it can start to sweat and damage the work. Specifically with photographs, sometimes the bubble wrap can also leave marks or indentations on the work if they've left for long enough. Tissue paper is also very good to use, specifically acid-free tissue paper. And lastly, if you buy works that come in crates, it's always important to store the crate away from the artwork. This is because sometimes crates can have wood borer beetle or some sort of insects that live inside the crate. Once those get out of the crate and into your artwork, they can start to damage certain aspects of the work. So if possible, please try to store crates away from the actual artworks. Yeah, and thank you. That's sort of the individual micro level of looking after collections. They are different things, lots of more things to speak about, but those are the most important, and as an aspiring collector, the most beneficial, I think, to know. Thank you.